Atina Diffley is an organic farmer, organic farming consultant, an award-winning author, and one of our movement's outstanding leaders. For over 30 years, she and her husband ran Gardens of Eagan organic vegetable farm in Minnesota, and she is now a highly sought-after organic farming and food safety consultant, as well as a plant breeder. She has championed the cause of organic agriculture at every level of government. Her advocacy has addressed the pressures of suburban development on agriculture, and she successfully led a citizen campaign in Minnesota against the fossil fuel industry to create a first-in-the-nation set of protections from development for organic farms. She's won innumerable awards and honors, including Farmer of the Year from the Midwest Organic and Sustainable Education Services and EcoFarm, and she's served on the board of Moses and of the Organic Seed Alliance, among many other public service roles. She'll be doing a book signing right here in this banquet hall after her talk, and we are really thrilled to have her here with us tonight, so please join me in a warm round of applause for Atina Diffley.
Thanks, Roland. Hello, I'm really thrilled to be here. Such a beautiful place, and you're also beautiful. I hate saying that, but you are. And, you know, my earliest memories, they're in the garden, and I think many of you will be able to relate to this because our spring ritual, and this is from before I was an articulate person, you know, when I was still in that sensory stage of life where we see colors and smells, and it's all on a sensory experience. So our family spring ritual was the garden, and their dad would be plowing the garden with the rototiller, and we'd be following him, stepping into his big footprints as he tilled the soil. Birds hopping around, pulling worms, that fresh scent of life coming out of the soil as it rolled over. And at that point in my life, my favorite thing in the world was rain. I would sense it coming somehow, and I would run out to the garden, I would lie back to the soil, I would close my eyes and just hum and wait. And those first drops touching my skin were God speaking to me. And when those first drops hit the soil, it was just God's perfume sprayed all over me. So when I was a kid and people would say, well, what are you going to be when you grow up? Which is like, why? Don't ask kids that. But everybody does. I did it tonight to your daughters. Really, I was trying to get the parents to stop talking and get the kids to talk. But I would always say, I'm going to be a farmer or a bum. I mean, they both got to be dirty. Who in this room doesn't love getting dirty? And I had some Hollywood image of bums, like jumping over a white, perfect picket fence and stealing tomatoes. That sounded like a lot of fun. And I really thought they were both independent. Like, you all know better now. I thought I'd be my own boss if I was a farmer. But really, I was just trying to get the adults off my back. And it wasn't until I left my parents' home and was living in a city buying food. This was the 70s when we didn't have great food everywhere. I couldn't eat the food. I'd grown up on real food. My parents grew my food. And there I was buying food in a grocery store, and it just had no vitality to it. It didn't have any life. And that was the point where I absolutely knew, besides any kind of joke, that I had to grow my own food, and that's really what I wanted to do with my life, was feed people. So that was really a pivotal point in my life. And then I was like, okay, let's do it. But just like today's farmers, how was I going to get land? How was I going to get money? How was I going to learn everything I had to learn? Interest rates, 15 to 18% at that point in time. So I just started with what I had. I had flower pots I had, you know, around the house, and I just started growing food. I got a job as a produce manager, which was really great because I learned how to make the buyer really happy in that process. I worked as a migrant picker in Florida. I was a tangerine queen in 1979 because I could outpick the migrants. They could outdo me on the grapefruits, which was this huge, heavy sack going up and down the ladders, but tangerines, I had them beat. And I still was, you know, how am I going to actually get on a farm? And really, I just got lucky. One day I was driving down Highway 3 in Minnesota, and there was this sign, turn here, sweet corn. And I, whoop, right in that driveway, and there it all was. that scent of basil, that flash of red tomato. And there just really happened to be this really handsome bachelor farmer with too many cabbages, and he needed someone to sell them. And he thought I could handle the job, and I could. So, I won't tell you the whole part of the story about how I was actually married at the time and had to deal with that first. And if you read my book, you have to read between the lines to really figure it out. So there we were farming in Eagan, Minnesota, 20 minutes from downtown Minneapolis, 3.5 million people, 20 minutes. And we were on his family's farm, 120 acres, since they took it from the Indians in the 1850s. Eagan had been the green district for the Twin Cities and had provided the main source of fresh produce, hay, meat, eggs, cheese, until the 50s, 60s, when rural denazification really came in. These were small farms. These were 10-acre, 20-acre farms. They didn't grow a lot of food. They fed their group of people. Many of them had delivery routes. They had keys to people's houses. They put the food in the house. They delivered to stores. They sold at markets. That's how the Twin Cities was fed. And then we had that all collapse. So my husband grew up in that community. He saw it as a child. He worked for those farmers as a kid, and he saw it be lost. And he knew that it was important. He took over his family farm in 1972. And got certified organic in 1973. So he knew that it was important to create this movement, and he knew these old-timers had knowledge that he needed. He tried going to the university for an education in agriculture, and he dropped out after 2 weeks. All they were talking about at that point was chemicals. People weren't talking about organic systems. So he just interviewed all these old guys. He said, how did you do it before the chemicals? How did you get your fertility? Et cetera, et cetera. So they were real valuable, and he was really able to capture their knowledge. And he, my husband, Martin, is really like a walking library of all these other human beings. So I want you to think about that for a second, how all of us are a little walking library, walking around, and how important that is. It's one really beautiful thing about this organic and sustainable farming movement. We share what we learn. And much of what we know actually came from farms experimenting. We didn't really have organic research until the early 2000s. So there I got lucky and was just farming with him. And I will tell you, this farm was 120 acres. There was about 25 tillable. It had never been destroyed. It had been in the family since the 1850s. The fields were very small and tucked in. It still had its native plants. It still had what was there before that family came. You can see in this photograph on the farm, this was obviously fall. There's some hawthorns. They're on that tree. There's at least 5 things blooming in that picture. None of that was planted by us. I see goldenrod and yarrow and some asters. Can't tell what the rest is from here. There's an echinacea in there. That was there. We didn't plant that. So there I was, a young woman, and I thought, wow, I thought this was going to be really hard. This is actually really easy. I mean, it was hard work. We worked really hard. We planted, we weeded, we hoed, we picked, we sold. So when I say it was easy, I mean the production part of managing our insects and pests, we really didn't do anything. And so I was like, yeah, I always heard about pests that I was going to have to manage, but we don't have any. So I was just like, well, whatever. I didn't know anything about biological diversity. This was not a buzzword or a buzz phrase at this point in time. But it was there. Those ecosystem services, the regulating services that are regulating our climate, the supporting services, fresh water, genetic diversity, all that was just happening around me. Yeah, I learned this in 6th grade, that trees make oxygen. But I hadn't really understood how utterly dependent we are on nature. I just, went about my own stuff. Yes, we were using supporting services every time we planted a soil building crop, incorporated into our soil, to build our soil, to have nutrient cycling, to feed our plants. It was just what we did. I didn't think about it that much. It's how you farm. The light first started coming on the day I found a great horned tomato worm. with little bits of rice sticking out of it. And I was like, what is this? Really weird. And at first it had terrified me by wagging its tail at me and like spitting some hissing noise. And I was like, whoa, what is that? But, to learn that that was a parasitic wasp that had laid those eggs in that worm, and that worm was dying and not a pest problem for me because of that parasitic wasp. And then I started noticing, well, yeah, those parasitic wasps need somewhere to live. So I started getting just a small inkling of what this is about and how this is working. So that was pretty exciting. And then, of course, we had kids. It sort of happens sometimes if you're not careful enough. And so there were those cultural services, the spiritual services. Those kids of ours, they grew up on that farm. I didn't even have daycare. I just had a nice mud puddle, and take off their clothes, put them in the mud puddle. I really don't know anything more effective with a little kid. Keep them busy when you're busy on the farm. It's a little embarrassing once in a while if certain people came over, but this was really the place where they were learning about the life process. They had a relationship with this land. My daughter's middle name was Chicory, which I taught a class on weeds yesterday in South Dakota, and they were all talking about chicory, and they were really kind of a grin when I told them that's my daughter's middle name, and I named her that because the flower is so beautiful, and chicory chives in waste places. And I knew that she would thrive through life's hardships. So she had a special chicory plant. That's where she went when she was upset or needed to have some quiet time to process something, was that special spot. They were on the farm with us. They planted with us. We had a roadside stand, and they loved working there and meeting people and helping and all that great stuff that kids do. We also had a wholesale business. Now, the one problem, this is all pretty idyllic. I'm making it sound more romantic probably than it was. I was pretty tired at the end of the day, as I'm sure you all know exactly how that feels. The one problem was that Eagan, where we lived, had not left any land zoned for agricultural purposes. So in my mind, this land was developed. This is a certified organic vegetable farm with a roadside stand and a wholesale business. But the city of Eagan wasn't really planning on keeping any agriculture in its limits. And the day came when 20 acres was needed for a school. Well, you really can't say no very easily to a school district. They have eminent domain rights. And we didn't own the land. It was owned by my husband's 4 cousins, 4 women cousins. So it wasn't even our decision. We actually were the renters who kept the land in Green Acres, which is a tax program that kept it from being taxed at development rates. We just owned an acre where our house was, and my husband had grown up there on that land as if it was family land, but he didn't be the inheritor. So we had a house, roadside stand, our greenhouses, our kids' garden, their little garden where they planted their stuff. So that land had to be sold. And at first we thought, well, this really doesn't impact us that much because most of the land they're taking is swamp. Like, what were they doing? They're ripping up a swamp. And most of it was pretty marginal. I thought, well, we're going to be able to just continue and coexist right next to that process. And of course, the bulldozers come in, and if you've ever witnessed this process, they take every tree. They take every bush. They took the blades of grass. They even sold the living soil. Our fields were right next to that, and we thought, yeah, we'll continue. Well, they needed to bring the Soon water across the rest of the farm to serve the school. And because the Soon water is crossing the land, it is now more valuable because it can be developed. And you recognize it as already developed, having a purpose. You don't have to pay those Soon water assessments until you sell the land. But this particular one had 11% interest on it. That means that if you owe $500,000, in 7 years, you owe $1 million. And in another 7 years, you owe $2 million. And in another 7 years, you owe $4 million. That's how they get the land. What kind of choice is that for a family to make? Sit there and think, if we wait, we're going to owe more than the land's ever going to be worth? 2 of the sisters wanted to sell it, 2 of them didn't. They did an incredible job of staying in relationship through such a difficult decision. And you know, what's never? If you never sell the land, you never have to pay it, but never ever is a fairy tale, and it is a really long time. So the land was sold. And what happened next was the most life-changing experience for me. The developer became our landlord. And the development process was going to be a 3-year process. First, we'll do this section of the farm. We had them at our table with the map out on the table. Then we're going to do this section, and then you're going to do the 3rd section, and we can rent the fields until they're developed. Of course, there was the caveat if they changed, they had the right to change their plans at any point of time, and if any of their development processes damaged our crops, they were not liable. We didn't have a whole lot of options but to sign this document. We'd been looking for our own land for a long time and really hadn't found any. So that development process started. And as I said, every bush, every blade of grass, they sold that living topsoil. And what we experienced is that we were farming land that was immediately adjacent to land that had no life. We literally experienced an ecological collapse. Our crops were overrun by pests. We really never had any pest problems before that. You know, I'd see a few pests in the fields, but never enough that we had to take a lot of action. Disease was rampant. We couldn't manage our water. We would have standing water in fields, which in Minnesota is the first ingredient to have a complete disease breakout. We would have water hit the ground, a rain. There was no life to take the water in, and it would just grab the soil and run and bury our crops. So that was when I started really getting, you know, this conversation about biological diversity. This isn't just some sweet little thing we talk about. This is real. I saw it on a very microcosm on one little piece of land. But I saw that we can't live without it. So I started to really get what nature was doing for me that I really had no idea of before that. And then there was something even deeper and harder and heart-wrenchinger. And that was my kids. You know, they were little kids. This is all they knew. This is what they knew of as God. This was the life process to them. And they were learning that the sacred would not always be protected. They were learning that their parents were not all-powerful beings who can protect them from bad things happening. They're not supposed to learn that till they're defiant teenagers. That's the loss of innocence. My daughter withdrew. She went from being this just like really happy kid who helped us on the farm and chatted with the customers. She withdrew into the house, became a compulsive cleaner, even removed the spots from our clothing when she washed them. And my son became very violent, very aggressive. And there was a day that came when I found him, little kid, 3 years old, standing on our one little acre with his toes standing in our grass, thick, lush, green, with his toes right up to the edge of the line between green and brown, between life and death, between ours and theirs, just staring down at this raped landscape, watching those bulldozers push that soil around so meaninglessly. And I stood behind him and just watched him, and then he just erupted, kicking, swearing, language that where did he ever hear these words? So angry. Just, I don't know if he thought he was somehow powerful and could change it, or if he was grieving. And I touched his back. I said, go for it, you know, just go for it. And he picked up clumps of soil and threw them in the direction of the bulldozers, but they just crumbled, mere dust in the void of such a loss that was so much bigger than him. And This went on and on and on. He couldn't stop. He just kept kicking and screaming and crying and swearing and throwing, and he just became weak. I mean, he physically couldn't continue. His voice was hoarse, but he couldn't stop. And I picked him up and I held him to my chest and I said, just let it go. Do not hold on to this. And what came up and out of him then was so much bigger than could have possibly been inside of this little body. But it was completely of him, and it was a grieving for the entire world of something lost that cannot be returned. Eventually, he fell like asleep. I don't really think he was sleeping. I don't really know where he was, but he was there a very long time. And when he came back, he said, Mom, when can we go look at land for sale again? When can we go look for a farm? And he said, what kind of tree do you love the most? He said, I love hawthorn and sumac and oak. And when he said, I love, I knew he was going to come back, that he would be okay, that he had really grieved, and that he would come back and learn to love a piece of land again, and that he would be okay. And that's what's there now on that piece of land, 240 houses. I look at that map and I really cannot tell you where the fields are anymore. All of our fields were named, and our field roads, they were small fields. And yeah, I just look at it and I really can't quite figure it out. And then I look away, I was like, I don't really need to figure that one out. I got other things to figure out. I have to go there. But as easy as it is in that development story to really get this relationship with land that we have, this is a relationship we have, it's actually agriculture, not development. That's the leading cause of habitat degradation and species extinction. So something that all of us are involved with, whether we're farmers, we're all involved in this as eaters. And you as farmers are directly involved with it, because how our food is grown really makes a big difference. Agriculture, 39% of land use. Fresh water use, 70% is agriculture. Deforestation, 81% of deforestation is from agriculture. Those choices we make every single day running our farms and eating, those are those numbers. We look at this one from Iowa, 29%. When we look at greenhouse gas emissions per sector, 29% are coming from agriculture in a farming state like Iowa. That's pretty real. It's not hard to figure out. We're corn and soybeans up there. It's a monoculture. We think corn and soybeans are a diversity. We get Farmer of the Year awards for people that add a third crop like pumpkins. Woo! It's based on a fossil fuel system. We don't see a whole lot of diversity in those things, and that's what it results in. There's nothing covering that land once that crop is taken off, and we know that land needs to be covered. Just bringing one other species into a monoculture means that other species come. Think of the insects that come when you go throwing a little annual clover into a cornfield. The insects. Think of the soil protection that happens. Think of the species in the soil, the mycorrhizal fungi, the bacterias. And think of what happens in winter when that crop is finished and harvested and the soil is still covered. It makes a difference. It makes a big difference. Think about vegetables. Most of the vegetables consumed in the United States are grown in acres and seas of black plastic. That's a monoculture. They stick the vegetable in there. You could tell me that it reduces the herbicide use. That's possible, but it sure doesn't increase the biodiversity. And then the hedgerows are ripped out in the name of food safety. No species. And you know, there's really great research now. I love looking at research. I love research. This one's from UC Davis, where they found that grass and wetlands can filter up to 99% of E. coli during a rain event. So who's going to tell me that's a food safety practice that's going to improve the safety of our food, ripping out a hedgerow and the grass around a field Think about trees, how they have the capacity to filter airborne dust that may be pathogen laden. These are ecosystem services, and we want to really find out everything we can about them and take advantage of them. Beneficial rows in the middle of a broccoli field. That's on my farm. That's a kale field with annual rye and white clover. I really saw a reduction in our cabbage lopers when we did that. That's asparagus. That's a Red Fox farm. Is that what it's called? It's in Virginia. He plants soybeans, tunas, asparagus. I was really impressed. He said he hasn't had to add fertility to that field in 10 years. When he's done picking the asparagus, he does a clean, weed-free, and plants that soybean. Now, I will tell you, when I show pictures like this to people that don't know anything about farming, they get excited. They get really excited. Because before that, it's just sort of buzz, buzz, buzz. Yeah, this stuff's buzz, buzz. But then they see it. They're like, well, that's kind of cool. I think that's kind of cool. Think about it, you know, our meat systems. The difference between having a feedlot with shipped in feed, which in the Midwest is corn, compared to those cows out on their pasture. And yesterday I had to chase some cows. So the first thing I want to ask you to do is really about your relationship with the land. Now, usually I just say, please include regenerative practices and biologic diversity in your farm, but I knew you guys were mostly already doing that, so I had to add include and improve. Because I'm going to ask you to always do a little more. It's this concept of continuous improvement. You know, we learn new stuff. We introduce new stuff to our farms. We share it with each other. We learn. Now there's really fun research on soil. They can do the DNA tests on soil. So now it's just exploding what we're learning about soil building. Like for most of my farming career, we just sort of stuck this in the ground, stuck that in the ground, then stood there and watched, hey, look, I think that one worked. That didn't work so good. But we didn't really know what we were doing. Now we're getting all this really exciting research. Now, I've been talking about your relationship with the land and what I want you to do as farmers, but I also want to really talk about the fact that you are really the link to your customer. That you're like this middle link between that land that you have a personal relationship with and them through the food. The food is this carrier. So this conversation you're having with them is really, really important and very fundamental because you're doing that link. And I just want to talk about this from a very specific marketing perspective, because if you ask the average organic or sustainable farmer, oh, why does this matter? Why should we be organic or sustainable? They all say the same thing. Oh, soil, mycorrhizal fungi, bacteria, blah, 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 for half an hour. They talk about soil. What does the average organic customer say when you say, why should I buy organic? They talk about health. They say, I don't want to give my kids pesticides. That's personal to them. If you want to influence somebody, you got to know what they care about. You have to know what is personal to them. This other stuff, environmental, ecological, economical. What's the other one up there? I just talked all day. Social, how we treat our workers. Is that stuff important? Absolutely. Do we need to talk about it? Absolutely. But understand that it's probably, for most of your customers, an external value. So we have to talk about it, we have to educate about the external stuff, but we gotta be driving home the message through what's important to them. It's not any different than convincing your kids to brush their teeth. Tell me how you do that later. Anyways, what's important in my community? 55% of the wells in my community have nitrate levels above the drinking water level. What does that mean? What does it mean to them? That's blue babies. That's pretty real. I know people with blue babies. So they want to know why. Well, you look at the research, 72% of those nitrates are coming from our cropland. Well, how is organic different? We have plenty of research showing that organic farming systems reduce nitrate leaching, not only into the water, but into the atmosphere. That is something now that they can really relate to because it's real to them. They can see that it impacts them. So as I'm talking to people and my customers, I want to bring this information to them. It's very important that I bring this information to them because they trust me, they have a relationship with me through my food. But I want to talk about it in a way that I want to deliver the information about the problem, but I also want to talk about the solution, because I don't want to create hopelessness. So that bringing the solution is really important, whether it's showing your farm, whether it's sharing research from Rodale, 15 to 28% more carbon in the soil. That's going to reduce problems for my customer because it's affecting climate change. So I'm talking it to them through their lens. Organic farms use less energy. They emit less greenhouse gas. This is research to back it up. Organic farming has higher yields in drought. For every 1% of organic matter, that soil can hold 16,500 gallons of water. So I'm not going to go to them and say, yeah, I like having higher organic matter because I don't have to spend as much money in irrigation. That's about me. That's not personal to them that I save money in irrigation. Why does that matter to them? That's how I want to deliver that to them. So that's all very important, and really think about what your story is and how you can bring your story to your farm in a way that's going to just really engage them and give them a picture of, well, who is this farm? What do they care about? What do they look like? What do they value? That's going to really do a lot. A lot. So I'm bringing you back to that development story. We did buy a new farm. It took us 6 years to find one, and in that 6-year period, we rented 32 different properties with a 22-mile, radius. Can you talk about learning management skills? We couldn't find a large piece of certifiable land. We were certified organic. We didn't want to be transitional or some other title at that point in time. We would have changed our market, and really all we could find was like a half acre here and an acre over there, and we certainly weren't making any money. We were just staying alive till we found a new farm. And that is a picture of our farm in 1991 when we finally bought it. 100 acres, pretty much tilled, monocropped. Soil was compacted. We could not get, anything in there. We knew it was good black prairie loam, but it had the crap beat out of it, and it had pretty low organic matter at that point. You can see the waterway running through the middle. They were just plowing right through this intermittent stream. I don't know how. We have water in it most of the time. They were plowing right through it. So we knew that before we could farm this land, we had to bring the life back to it, turn the life. So we actually put it through a 3-year building program before we took a cash crop off as we were running this myriad of different land, little plots. So first thing we did was deal with the water. There were no grassed waterways, and we walked that farm in a heavy rainstorm with stakes, and we staked out where the waterways had to be. And brought those in and got them covered with grass and thought about how the fields would be. And then we had to deal with the soil health. It was so compacted. The rain would hit that soil and just run off. It couldn't soak in, or it would sit in puddles and just move. That intermittent stream just kept moving around because it just kept getting filled up with soil. So we had to put it through a 3-year soil building program. We had to think about biological diversity. The only diversity on there was those woodlots and that one hedgerow. So we had to bring in beneficial species for flowers. We had to bring in beetle banks, et cetera. And then we had to bring in the crop diversity. So that picture is in 2005, and there's 52 small fields, and they all have beetle banks and diversity between them. Now let me tell you, that was really a lot of work putting that thing together. Think about that first farm I had. It just existed. I just took it for granted. It's a lot more work to put that together, and it's a never-ending task. So in 2005, one day, I sat down and I said, this is all really interesting, but I actually wonder, I was doing my end-of-the-year spreadsheets, how much food we'd produced, and I said, I wonder how many servings of food it was. And I did the calculations. I don't actually know how many servings it was. It was based on a mathematical equation of how many servings are in a pound of broccoli or something. But I came up with 3 million servings. That was really different than looking at a spreadsheet that said how much money I made or how many pounds I sold. That was people sitting at a table, laughing, talking, sharing food. That was little kids growing up on good food. That was family reunions. That was parties. I saw all the people all of a sudden. And it was a pretty amazing moment. So that's my second ask. Really recognize this role you have as the link between the land and the people you are feeding. You are feeding people. That's a really beautiful thing. It's the most fundamental task there is on the planet. I was going to say it was the oldest profession, but we all know it's not. Okay. So there's my lovely husband, Martin, trying to pretend he's Clark Gable in the sweet corn patch. This was a poster we used in our stores, and we had that little bubble there, and we would tell the stores what to write in it. They would say, you know, Martin planted yesterday, or it just tasseled, or tomorrow, Atina will be here at 8 o'clock with the first corn. It was really great, that face of the farm kind of thing, where we were talking with them, and they really felt like they knew who we were. And because they saw our faces all the time on these posters in the stores and through all of our point of purchase materials, they actually thought they knew us. Like, I would tell you, it happened to me every single time I was in the cities. Somebody come up and say, hey, Atina, how are the kids? And blah, 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 blah. I was like, I haven't got a clue who they are. But it was so personal to them that our land was actually their land. That's how they perceived it. This was their farm. And Martin and I were having our winter meeting. I gave a quality of life workshop today, and all of you, but 8 of you missed it. So I'm not going to give you the whole 8 hours in the next minute, but I'm going to give you one little piece of it, is that every single winter, Martin and I sat down and we spent a full week reevaluating and assessing our farm and how we were meeting our goals and thinking through what we wanted to do. And one year, the word fungible came up. I have kind of a fanaticism about word of the day, and fungible is a really great word. Everyone should leave this room tonight really thinking about what that word means for you. How many of you want to be fungible? I mean, fun. The word fun is it. Don't you want to have fun on the farm? Oh, put those hands down. You don't want to be fungible. I was tricking you. Fungible means exchangeable for another of like kind. Exchangeable for another of like kind. Commodity crops are fungible. That bushel of field corn from Farmer Mary that goes to the elevator has the same value set by the Chicago Board of Trade as that bushel from Sue. Oh, it's great having all these lady farmers, isn't it? Okay, so you want to be fungible. And it's a very important word. And we're going to talk more about why and what that means. And the other thing that came up in that meeting was goodwill. What is goodwill? How much do we have? Does it have a value? Could we actually put a dollar value on goodwill? Could we go to our banker and say, oh yeah, you should loan me $200,000 because I've got like $200,000 worth of goodwill? We actually do say that to our banker. But we really didn't get an answer in this meeting. You know, it was like something we were batting around and having our little intellectual sparring competition on it, but we didn't get an answer. And the next spring, I got my answer. Because it was a beautiful Sunday, we had just finished planting kale, and my hands were still stained green from those kale plants. I was sitting at my desk with my feet up and the radio on, going through the mail. I only open my mail once a week on Sunday afternoons. It's my time management thing. Go to my website, pull down my time management thing. Anyways, there were 3 letters from someone called Mincan. That's what it said on the return address, Mincan. I was like, Mincan? Minnesota, must be Minnesota, can. That sounds like, yes, we can. And I decided they were from a food shelf. And I was really annoyed because I thought they were asking me for money, and they didn't need 3 letters. 1 would have sufficed, and they were wasting paper, so I threw them in the recycling bin, and I didn't open them. And then that little voice that nags in your head and tells you what you're really supposed to do, and you'd better listen to it because it's probably right, told me to go and get one and open it, and I did. And it was not from a food shelf. It was from Koch Industries. Any of you heard of the Koch brothers? A Koch Industry-owned crude oil pipeline called the Mincan Project. They give them such nice names. And they weren't actually looking for money. They were looking for my land. So they were writing to inform me that they were applying for a route permit and that we were in the corridor. Oh, and by the way, we're going to need a few extra acres, like 20, for a pumping station. I really believe that my heart stopped beating in that moment. I'm not saying that as an expression. I knew what would happen if that went through there. I'd already been through development. I knew we would not grow food on that land again. And quite frankly, I was too tired to redo, move, start another farm. I'm sorry, that's not going to happen again. And I'm really embarrassed about the first thing I did, which is I grabbed all 3 letters. I went in the recycling and grabbed them. And I ran down to the machine shop where Martin was working, and I waved those letters in his face, and I told him about the pipeline. And this is the part that's so embarrassing. I said, you have to call them up and tell them what's here. They just don't know we're here. You have to tell them. And then I went into this long spiel with exactly what he should say. I obviously didn't know. And he just looked at me and he said, you know, they put these things where they want. You have all the answers. You call them. And this is the part that's so embarrassing, because I said, well, they'll listen to you better because you're a man. I really still, just saying that, I felt shame. So what was happening in that moment when I said that, and I believed that? I gave my power away. I thought I wasn't an expert. What do I know? I don't know anything about power lines. I don't know anything about pipelines. I don't know about public utilities. I know about organic farming. That's all I know. And I was minimizing that. So don't ever say the word just in front of me, by the way, because I'll tell you, oh, I don't hear that word. Please rephrase that. So if you said, well, I'm just a gardener, I'd make you say, I'm a gardener, with your shoulders back. I didn't get there quite yet. So, you know, my husband was saying, I'm not going to do it. You do it, and then it doesn't work anyways, but I'll stand behind you if you want to do it. Anyways, I went back up to the house, and I thought, this is ridiculous. I got to learn more. And I started reading, got online, found a nice little diagram they show you about how they're going to take your farm apart and put it all back together, just like it was before, so you can go back about your business. I got to find out how they're going to do that. That's like, I kind of like to know how they do that. Thought I knew a lot about soil building, but I don't quite get how that's even possible. So I kept researching, and I found what was called the Agricultural Impact Mitigation Plan. So this is the document that the Department of Agriculture manages and works with the Public Utilities Commission and the power companies to manage how they're going to put the land back together after they go through. And I thought, well, this is going to be really interesting reading. I can't wait to read it. And I'm going along, and I'm like, And then I come to MnChem pipeline will not knowingly allow more than 12 inches of topsoil erosion. How would you feel if somebody said that to you about your farm? By the way, we're going to run a little pipeline through here, and we won't knowingly allow more than 12 inches of erosion. Would you sign up for that one? Well, you're a farmer of the year, you wouldn't, but how about you over there? You look younger. Maybe we can hoodwink you into this. Okay, that's when I really got mad. And I just like, well, this is ridiculous. This picture, I measured it. That's 6 inches. That's 6 inches. And they were saying they would not knowingly allow more than 12. And what's the not knowingly? Well, they don't exactly live there. How are they going to know if it's more than 12? They only show up when they have their bulldozers with them. I was really mad. And I picked up that phone and I dialed that number and I hung it up. I was really scared. At the same time, I was really mad. But I did eventually call, and I went through a long little series of, oh, you need to speak to so-and-so, and then they put me on hold, and then, like, really, it was like an hour and a half later, I finally talked to the woman who said, oh, you don't want a pipeline there? Talk to the judge. And she hung up on me. So that was the moment where I, like, okay, I got to do something here. If I got to talk to a judge, maybe I'd like to get an attorney. So I got a list of the first list was eminent domain attorneys. Started calling them. Every single one had the same answer for me. Oh, that's interesting. Let me check our records and get right back to you. A minute later, they come back. I'm sorry. We have a conflict of interest. We cannot help you. Every single one of them was tied up on a retainer. That's when I switched to the environmentalist, when I reached Paula Maccabee and gave her my then very well-practiced spiel about being an organic farm and our problem, and she said, Gardens of Eagan, organic farm, crude oil pipeline, 12 inches of topsoil erosion? This is going to be fun. I was like, Yeah, I got the right gal. So the very first conversation I had with her, we had to establish what our goals would be. And I said to her, do you think we could stop this pipeline altogether? What would that take? It started our soil versus oil, kale versus Koch campaign. Because the pipeline was going to take my kale fields. And I'm going to tell you guys, I don't tell most people this, but I actually went out to the kale field at the point that I hired the attorney. And I had a little conversation with my kale patch. I did the old Imagine the Diva thing. I'm blushing. And I said, okay, Kale, you're threatened. And I'm actually, most people don't know how to hear your voice. So I'll be your translator. But you're really giving the message. You got to show us how organic systems work by being incredibly healthy and giving us outrageous yields, et cetera, et cetera. And by the way, you have to pay for it. And I will tell you that kale patch produced extra exactly what this attorney cost. So the next year it paid for our solar system. So go and talk to those crops. So my first conversation with Paula, I said, okay, can we stop the thing? And she said, sure, we can stop it if we can show that society doesn't need the oil. Can you do that? She was a real agitator. I said, well, yeah, of course we can do that because I got all this data showing that organic farms use way less energy, like 40% less energy, and I was going on and on and on and on about that. But she said, yeah, but what percent of farms in the United States, what percent of acres are organic? Well, when I went for the records, United States, 0.60, not even 1% at that point in time. So yeah, I could say these systems work. We have research that show they work. But I couldn't say society's ready to do it. I couldn't say the farmers are ready to do it. So I knew I didn't have that argument. So the goals we ended up setting was that we would write an organic agricultural mitigation plan that differentiated how organic farms are operated and managed and would protect the soil and certification of an organic farm. Our other goal was that organic farms would be avoided when feasible. Those were our goals. And that was a really sad moment for me because there were 5 organic farms on the route. There were a lot more farms that used organic practices and that were feeding people. But because they weren't certified, I didn't have something that I could hold up in court with credible evidence because my organic certification was credible evidence in a court of law. It was a written document that I had written about how I ran my farm. It wasn't hearsay. I wasn't just in court saying, well, I do this and that, so you have to do it too. I had a document that had been third-party certified, inspected, and it was federally registered. Incredibly credible in a court of law. So it was really sad that I couldn't say, oh, by the way, all these other farms, they're the same, they just don't have this piece of paper. It wasn't going to hold up in court. So we had 2 campaigns. I want to tell you something else first. I told you we wrote this organic mitigation plan that we wanted to get through. This was my other big turning point. So I'm like, Paula's saying to me, okay, we're going to write a draft. Who do you want to write the first draft? And I'm sitting there, it's like midnight, because I didn't really sleep very much that year. I really literally slept an hour a night. I was just so charged, I didn't need sleep. But it was literally midnight or 2 in the morning, and I'm sitting there thinking, okay, who should I get to write this first draft? And this little light bulb went off. You ding dong, you don't have to ask some guy to write the draft. You can write it. You know about organic farming. You've been doing it for 20-some years. You write the draft, and then go to other people and get their input. Don't just do it yourself. Get other people's input, but go ahead and write it. And it was just such an eye-opener for me again. Here I was, giving my power away, thinking someone else had to write it. I could write it. And I sat down and wrote it that night, in the middle of the night, sent it to Paul in the morning. So we ran 2 campaigns. And one was based on showing in court that an organic farm is a valuable natural resource, like a wetland is defined as a valuable natural resource because of the ecosystem services that an organic farm provides through its production practices that go beyond the food produced. So that was the legal argument. And the gift of having to transition that farm all of a sudden was a gift, because we're compulsive record keepers. So it was very simple for me to document in court the changes to our soil structure from when we took over that farm, the reduction in, I had actually documented the reduction in soil sediments in that waterway. So I could show how our agricultural practices had actually significantly changed this soil and this water in only 1991 to 2006, 15 years. So that was really, really quite amazing. That was the one argument. And then our other branch was the fungible piece. We had to show to the court that, yeah, they could pay us for our loss. This is in legal perspectives. I had a loss. They could compensate me for my loss. So we went to our customers and we said, hey, we need a little support from you. The land that you've been eating from is threatened, and we need you to write a letter to the judge. So we used that same picture that we'd been marketing with, the same guy that they knew, and we asked them to write a letter to the judge. These letters were unbelievable. We just said, you don't have to, talk about energy. You don't have to know anything about pipelines. Just talk about your relationship with this piece of land, with this farm, and how you would be affected if it no longer existed. They talked about having their first family reunion every single year based on when the corn and watermelons come in. They talked about 4 generations in their family have been eating from this farm. They talked about being chemically sensitive back in the 70s when there was no place to buy food that was organic, and how they drove 2 hours every week to get their food. They talked about how they put that food up so they'd have something to eat that didn't make them sick. Doctors wrote and they said, we tell our customers who have certain illnesses, they listed the illnesses, to go buy their food at this farm. They included the research that backed up why that mattered. Researchers at the University of Minnesota said, if this was happening to my research plots, I would make just as much of a fuss. 4,200 people wrote a letter to the judge. They wouldn't have written those letters if they didn't have that relationship already with the land. I would have been lucky if I could have got 50 letters without that prior relationship. In fact, I told one of our produce buyers in a store about the whole thing, first time I told him about it, and I'll never forget his reaction. It was like water hitting cold rocks. He said, what should I do? What would you do if it was your farm? That's what he said to me. What would you do if it was your farm? He was so threatened in that moment that he actually forgot he didn't own the farm. I was like, yeah, I got you in my pocket. Okay, so there's a good third ask, right? And it really, we're going to stop in a second here. We'll have time for a few questions, and then we're going to have a book signing. But before we do that, before we stop, I want to really talk about what I learned that really affected me in that pipeline case. It was an incredible experience. I have actually never been that smart. I didn't even know I was that smart. I actually could feel, like, you know how they say the neurons connect our 2 sides of our brain? I could actually feel them growing and like going over to the other side for pieces of information. We're laughing, but I really felt this way. And I could remember I'd be in like everything was like this crystal intense second all the time. I would be in some courtroom or meeting some person that was just something so tiny, one little tiny conversation, and I'd know how to properly shake their hand or just do some little thing that made the difference between them fighting for me or not. And I'd remember in that moment the second I learned that skill, and I might have been 5. And I was like, I think my brain actually was going back and saying, I need that. So it really blew me away that when we need it, we are way, way smarter than we ever need to know, than we know. But what really struck me through the whole process, despite, I learned so much about pipelines and about law and all that kind of stuff, But the real life changer for me in that moment was understanding the whole giving away of my power thing, not recognizing my expertise. And I don't say that in any way that's arrogant. I say that actually humbly. Every single person in this room is an expert in what you do every day. You know what your land is like. You know where the water sits. You know about the people in your organization. You guys back there know about your farm. You're all experts. And I just wasn't recognizing that in myself. I wasn't recognizing our responsibilities as citizens. You know, there's some really bad laws out there. When they were written, somebody thought they made sense. Well, they might not make sense anymore. You get involved and you change them. Things don't change because they should. Things don't change because it's the right thing to do. Things change because people get involved. And when you're dealing with multinational corporations who have so much money, you should have seen us in court. It'd be me and my little attorney. She's like 4'11" with hair like that, and me on one side of the room in my sort of hippie clothing. And then on the other side would be these like 10 men in big black suits with their briefcases. And once I got past the feeling kind of powerless as a woman and as a farmer, I mean, so much of my life, I never saw this farmer hero thing coming. It really surprised me because when I was back there as a kid saying, I'm going to be a farmer or a bum, my parents were just as like, really, you're going to be a farmer? It wasn't much different than the, I'm going to be a bum. And they actually knew about good food. They fed us from our garden. But it just wasn't something that people were supposed to aspire to at that point in time. And now it is. So I just really want to ask all of you to do that same thing, is to really recognize your expertise in whatever it is. If you're particularly good at making people happy, you're an expert at making people happy. Whatever. Grab it, claim it, own it. What's the big phrase now? Lean into it. You're all good at leaning into your hose. I know that. Lean into this one and really claim it. So, thank you. It just seems like such a natural consequence. Yeah, we got not only everything that we were asking for, complete success, the night before the public hearing. I was kind of disappointed, actually, because I had like hundreds and hundreds of people ready to come to the public hearing, and I think the pipeline company probably figured that out and didn't want them all to show up. Anyways, not only, this is actually the most important thing. Well, there's so many most important things. Not only did we accomplish our goals, we educated the Public Utilities Commission and the judge. All those letters, they had to read them. And the judge and the Public Utilities Commission added things that I never even thought to ask for. They added to this routing permit that any landowner, doesn't matter if they're a house, a farm, organic user, chemical user, doesn't matter, every landowner had the right to say, I do not want chemicals used on my easement. That was huge. There's huge fights with power lines in Minnesota where they have the right to spray herbicides, and organic farmers say, hey, you can't spray organic herbicides here, this is an organic farm, and the power line just says, well, if you won't let us spray, then you have to manage these weeds. And they put the expense upon the farmer. So that the judge did this on her own, added these additional things, really pointed out to me that this whole thing I said about we're the educators, the Public Utilities Commission, they don't know anything about organic farming. That's what we're supposed to do as citizens. That's what this whole process did. All those 4,200 letters, our public documents that we filed, we educated them about organic farming. And I've been watching their decisions ever since, and they're making better decisions. So your one letter that you write can feel sort of small and meaningless, but you start adding those together and you start sending them to people, that is what changes how people think and what they understand. So keep writing those letters, keep calling those decision makers. Other questions?
How are your kids?
My kids. My daughter actually didn't recover from the development. She was older. We got to our new farm, and she did not reattach. And it was really an interesting dilemma when I wrote my memoir, because she was such a key character in the first half of the book. Everyone falls totally in love with her, and then she's a teenager who had not recovered from having this land ripped apart. And I really couldn't write in my memoir what she was doing and going through. It would have really been a violation of her spirit. So I had to find, how am I going to deal with that? And so I realized in the writing process to make it about myself, which is, I wrote about me as a mom and going through the loss of my child's connection to land. And that's how I got around saying what she was doing. She's thanked me about 100 times for that. My son did really recover. We got to our new farm, and he totally connected to that new farm. And I really believe that the difference between the two was that he did grieve that loss, and she didn't. She completely repressed it. But they're both doing great now. She's a nurse. She's got 3 kids. My son's a solar engineer, and he's got a little 3-year-old, Sasha. And the grandkids, they're all planning to share the farm, the 4 of them. And we recently put that, you've got a question right there. We recently put our farm, our new farm, I shouldn't call it new anymore, it's 1991, but we recently put a conservation easement on it. So that was a really happy moment in our life to know that it can't be developed.
Atina, our movement is extremely strongly blue in its politics. Would you speak to the question of how much support you got in your 4,200 letters across political divide in this country?
Oh, what a wonderful question, and it's absolutely true. I really saw through that process that I could not judge a person's position on food and land. We did get letters from people that I never would have expected them from. And I'm really glad he said that, because I was in South Dakota 2 days ago talking about weeds. And I had a fellow in there who was a regular non-organic farmer. And when we did our introductions and just said what we wanted out of the day and why we were there, he said, I'm here because my next door neighbor is an organic farmer, and we are having difficulty coexisting. He said, so I'm going to learn how you guys actually do this so that I can find ways so that I'm not negatively impacting this other farm. And then he said, and she actually has some practices that negatively impact me. So I'm hoping that together we can sit here and learn. And he was actually sitting with this woman who was his neighbor. It was really wonderful. And he was kind of scared being there. He was kind of defended. And I really reminded the group, I really thanked him for being there, and I just really reminded the group, you know, we all eat. We all change our tires with the same kind of wrenches. You know, 99.999% of what we do and think about is actually the same. Even our DNA is like basically the same. And to stop looking at how we're different and look at how we're the same. Find what we have in common. And that was just a really big moment for me. You know, I recently watched a video called How to Talk to a Climate Change Denier. Yeah, that was my reaction. But then I thought, well, I guess I'll watch the video. And what I learned from that video was they said, don't say you must do this. Talk about yourself. Make it about yourself. Talk about what you once believed, and then some experience you had and how it changes you and what you believe now. I did it 3 times tonight talking to you. I talked about how I just thought all this farming stuff was so easy, and then I had this development experience, and then I realized, oh, it's this ecosystem service that was making farming easy. So I didn't say in that story that you must do this. I told you what happened to me and how it changed me. And I have found that to be really effective in talking to other people, and before they can hear me, they have to know I heard them. So I first get them to talk and show them that I am listening and that I truly want to understand their perspective. I don't have to agree with it, I just have to understand it. And then once they feel understand, they're safe enough then to actually listen to my perspective. So that can be an effective way to talk to people that may have different beliefs. And then, of course, be willing to hear no. We were talking about that today in the quality of life class I was doing in the other room, and how when we really listen to someone else's needs, then they're going to be able to hear our needs. And then sometimes we can make a request. Would you be willing to? Would you be willing to just watch this video that explains? That's not as bad as, would you be willing to just eat organic food? But when we ask that, a request, they might say no. And we have to be willing to accept that. And when they say no, what we hear isn't no. We hear, oh, my request didn't meet their needs. Let's find another way to have this conversation that actually meets their needs. If I was actually listening and I understood their needs, I should be able to keep working on this with them, and we should be able to find something that meets both of our needs. So it's one thing to do that with people that think like you. It's a lot more challenging with people that have different values, but it is a way to keep those doors open, and food is the best way to open those doors. Have them over for dinner.